Hello. How's everyone doing? I'm doing a solo stream today. I'm going to be reviewing this debate between Yaron Brook and Bryan Caplan. Yeah, I saw this just in my recommended when I was looking up something else. I think it was to do with Dave Smith, his solo forum debate. I was like, this one should be good. Yeah, because obviously I got that big video on why I think anarcho-capitalism and objectivism should be going together. So we'll see what kinds of arguments Yaron brings. I can't imagine that Bryan Caplan is going to be bringing the same sorts of arguments as I would bring, because of course I don't think he's an objectivist. I believe he, if I were to guess, probably believes in like what Michael Humer, just basically like some form of consequentialism or intuitionism or whatever. That seems to be the basic vibe that I get from those types of people. Yeah, well, it's we got all the Australians in chat today. That's the benefit of these early streams. They're normally fast asleep by the time I stream.
Well, and now for the main event of the evening. Again, the resolution reads, anarcho-capitalism would definitely be a complete disaster for humanity. Taking the...
I would, if I was on that debate, I would reject that resolution, because I don't think that anarcho-capitalism refers to a specific bureaucratic structure. I think that's a mistake a lot of people make. So it's not like, oh, one day we can achieve anarcho-capitalism. Like, what does that mean? Anarcho-capitalism is just a philosophy. It's a position in philosophy which says that certain things are illicit, certain things are licit. So specifically it says any form of aggression is illicit. So what does it mean? It would be like saying, nominalism would be a total disaster for humanity. Nominalism being a position on the status of concepts, that they're just like sort of arbitrary labels for groups of particulars. What would it mean to achieve nominalism? What does that look like? I don't really know. So we don't really do this for other sorts of positions in philosophy. It seems to only be when you get up into the legal or the political realm. It's like, this would be a disaster. I suppose, if I want to be a little more charitable, it would be like, if you try to have some sort of free market in defense, that would be disastrous, as I imagine what Yaron is going to be arguing. But yeah, thank you for the $3 Australian, Monarcho-Hopian. Yaron Brook, indeed. Thank you very much.
Affirmative on that resolution, Yaron Brook. Yaron, please come to the stage. Taking the negative, opposing the resolution, Bryan Caplan. Bryan, please come to the stage. Jane, please close the voting. And Yaron, you can take it away, Yaron.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, Gene, and thank you, Bryan, for agreeing to do this this debate. And I know it's 2 against 1, so we all know where Gene's sympathies lie. You remember that part of the movie Braveheart, where Mel Gibson yells, "Freedom"? What is he yelling? What does that even mean? What's their concept back then? Is it the kind of idea we have, I think, in this room, of individual liberty, of individual freedom, of individuals using their mind to pursue their values? Free?
Well, yeah, that's... I mean, if you're asking about the conception of freedom they had back at the time, I mean, I'm not sure how he's going to link that to anarcho-capitalism. I mean, I imagine that the Scottish people in that time wouldn't be acquainted with capitalism. They probably just wouldn't want to be. It would be probably the nobility, you could call them in Scotland, not wanting to be under the control of the nobility over in England, is what I would imagine. It'll be interesting to see how he links that point to anarcho-capitalism, though.
Or absence of coercion? Or is it the kind of freedom of my gang over your gang? My bloodline over your bloodline? I want to be ruled by a Scottish king. God forbid I be ruled by a British one. That, of course, is the way the world was for almost ever.
Yeah, so I imagine he's going to go down the route of, well, anarcho-capitalism just means anything goes. Anarchism just means anything goes. It'll just be pure gang warfare because there is no, like, person there to, like, make the law objective or whatever. I mean, not every objectivist goes as far as to say that you need somebody to, like, make the law objective. But some of them do indeed go down that route, so it'll be interesting to see if that's what he goes for.
Gangs against gangs. There's no, with some exceptions here and there, central authorities that didn't emerge out of civil wars, out of anarchy, out of a situation where people were battling each other for policing authority.
And yeah, so this is kind of one of the problems you run into when you start trying to describe anarchy as a bureaucratic structure. So he's basically just defining anarchy means when you have people battling each other, when you have gangs battling each other in civil warfare. Like how, I mean, isn't it just a complete contradiction to say that there's civil war under anarchy? Like, even if you're going to have anarchy mean a society which is stateless, okay, I'll grant you that. But then how would there be civil war? Civil war means two factions fighting for the control of a single central government. It's absolutely nonsensical to say in this system where there is no government, there is factions fighting for control over the government. Like that's, you can't have it both ways. It's like, I know people like to just use buzzwords, but I mean, come on, if you're going to be trying to be a real stickler for definitions and trying to be like, oh, well, anarchism actually means yada, 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 then you're going to be a stickler for what civil war actually means. Just stick to your gang warfare point, I suppose.
For power.
Because, I mean, that is what they do. They do make this equivocation. I'm not just being, unfair and being too nitpicky here. Because another example I've heard used, I can't remember who did it, where it was the example of in Russia, when the White Army and the Red Army were fighting, you'd have to go out your house each day, see which flag is flying to know which set of laws you're living under. So that's why you need a single government, because if you have different governments fighting, then that's what anarchy actually means to these people. But that is actually war between two states. So they do this equivocation of civil warfare, two factions fighting over the same central government. They conflate that with no government, which is it's ludicrous.
Security agencies of this tribe or that tribe battling each other to see who would rule over everyone else. Freedom, as we understand it, is a massive intellectual achievement. Intellectual, cultural, political achievement. An achievement of ideas. The idea of individual rights, the idea of individual liberty, individual freedom, is a consequence of the thinking of philosophers, of thinkers, economists, for generations. And its political manifestation.
He made an interesting point there, which actually reinforces the anarcho-capitalist point. It'll be interesting to see if Caplan picks up on that. He said, like, well, freedom, in the proper conception of it, it was an achievement of philosophers. It's like, yeah, indeed, it is an achievement of philosophers if you have the right philosophy in place. Then from that you get a certain type of society. So obviously in Russia, you had a very bad philosophy there. So that's why it ended up badly. But the objectivists don't even seem to link this point properly. They just say, oh no, it'll necessarily be bad. It's like, well, I mean, why does government sometimes become bad? Well, it's because they have the wrong philosophy. It's like, okay, so yeah, the philosophy is what matters.
Its political manifestation was the achievement of a political system that, yes, gave government, created an entity with a monopoly over the use of force, but that limited that use of force, or at least tried to.
That's such a fanciful notion. First of all, it's just fanciful, the idea that you could keep this monopoly on force. We're going to give all the power to this one group. They're going to be the only guys who get to decide everything. They're going to decide all the rules. They're going to decide how to enforce those rules. They're going to have all the guns needed to enforce those rules. But we'll keep them real small. And the size that they should be kept at will be, in fact, determined by them. They're going to be the ones to interpret these rules about how small they have to be. So it's like it's nonsense on that front, but it's also nonsense like, well, every government is limited. An objectivist should understand that immediately. They should go, well, A is A, so everything is limited. So what the hell does a limited government mean? It means like limited to certain activities and not other activities. Well, every government is that way. The Soviets, they'll say, no, we're proper minarchists, you see. We've got a limited government. Our government is only concerned with, planning the entire economy and every aspect of your life, and we control everything. But we're not doing anything else, anything beyond that, so we're limited. It's like, well, okay, it's just a nonsense term. Like, what do you actually mean by that, Yaron?
At least for a period, on some people, it was flawed, granted, over how it used that force.
But how is it flawed, Yaron? They had, like, what would the actual, like, I mean, objectivists, they like to bring up that, they like to say, well, anarchism is a floating abstraction. What actually is the concrete example of the perfect government where they never stray outside of the proper philosophical line? What is that? What does it look like to have this monopoly, which, in spite of all of the incentives to do so, never grows at all? Like, what does that look like? Like, what is that? What can you point to it at any time in history? Like, I mean, if you're going to start throwing around terms like floating abstractions, then these are the types of attacks you can expect, and hopefully Bryan Caplan will bring some of these attacks.
With the idea that this is what was required in order for individuals to have their liberty, to have their freedom.
Okay, so the argument he's making then is you need to have this monopoly on the use of force in order for individuals to have liberty. And okay, I'll be interested to see how he fleshes that out.
For individuals to be able to be free. Because to be free, coercion must be extracted from the equation.
Okay, but coercion isn't extracted from the equation. You're just putting it into a monopoly. There is still this group with coercive force behind them. So you haven't extracted coercion from the equation at all. You've just given it all to one group. You've just given it to the sovereign. This is nonsense. You can't just say, well, under anarchy there'd still be conflicts. It's like, well, under statism there'd still be conflicts. Neither of us have this fucking magic wand which can get rid of conflict forever. Like, that's nonsense. So yeah, that is his argument then, is people require freedom. You need to get rid of coercion in order for people to have freedom. And to get rid of coercion, you give coercive power to one group of people. But hold on, that contradicts itself, because there is still going to be coercion then. His argument, it falls flat.
Coercion is not something one negotiates. Violence is not something one arbitrates. Violence is something that should be avoided. It should be extracted.
And the question is, what is best at getting rid of aggression? Like, what is best at doing these things? And the answer is, just like everywhere else, you have a free market. That's what's best at doing it. And you can say all you want, like, well, for there to even be a free market, there has to be zero coercion at all. It's like, well, then neither of us get to a free market, Yaron. Neither of us do that. Because your government, they also don't have this magic wand which gets rid of any coercion to allow there to be a free market. You never have a free market then.
And what I think the thinkers that brought us the idea of individual rights and that created a country that was based on it, again, with all its flaws, what they realized was you needed a monopoly over the use of force, over the use of retaliatory force. And for
Well, I mean, did they realize this, or did they just never have the counterexample? I mean, Murray Rothbard didn't exist. Like, who was the anarchist counterexample? It's like, oh, throughout all of history we've had anarchism, and then the founders, they came to a big realization that you need to have a monopoly. Like, this is nonsense. That's just what everybody was doing for all of time. It's not like some big, epiphany moment. We need to have a monopoly on violence. It's like, that's just what everybody fucking had.
force only to be used in retaliation. Now, in my view, to be free, the key concept for freedom is individual rights. It's the idea that every individual has a right to his life. In other words, he has the freedom to act.
Okay, so, I mean, yeah, people use this right to life nonsense a lot. It's very primitive. So what he means, he clarified, right to life means freedom to act. Well, freedom to act in which ways? Do I have the freedom, because I've got a right to life, do I have the freedom to murder you? What does that mean? You need to have, there's clearly something missing here, and it's the non-aggression principle. Maybe he'll clarify.
Again, based on his judgment in pursuit of his values.
In pursuit of his values, any values?
In the absence of coercion.
In the absence of coercion. So he's absent of coercion. So he's got the right of life. So he should be left absent of coercion. And he should be allowed to, okay, but what if I'm murdering someone? Well, I'm certainly violating their right to life because I'm coercing them. But then nobody's allowed to coerce me because I've got a right to life. You see, like, these primitive formulations, they lead into problems like this. And of course, then they have to tack on all these extra asterisks, being like, well, actually, it's only retaliation. And actually, it's also against fraud. And actually, it's also, like, they've clearly not gone at the root here. And the root is the non-aggression principle, which gives you anarcho-capitalism.
And the protection of individual rights necessitates a government. It necessitates some kind of institution that actually serves to extract that coercion from.
Okay, so let's repeat that.
It necessitates some kind of.
The right to life necessitates a government. It necessitates some institution which extracts coercion. No, it doesn't. It doesn't necessitate that. Surely, I've got a right to life on Yaron's premises. So therefore, this implies that there is a government which protects my rights. Whoa, hold on, there isn't actually. So it doesn't necessitate it. It just does not necessitate it. Maybe he's meaning to say that in order to have rights respected, the prerequisite of that would be that you've got a government, a single monopolistic entity, which protects rights. But actually, no, that isn't a prerequisite. That isn't a necessary prerequisite. Because what if it's just me and Crusoe on the desert island, and Crusoe isn't aggressing against me? Well, there isn't a government, but I'm not having my rights violated. Whoops. Like, so even the more charitable interpretation is just not true. Like, it doesn't necessitate a government. You don't necessarily have a government given you got rights. If that is the case, then Yaron's incorrect. It's proven that you don't have those rights that Yaron thinks you have, because we don't have a government which protects those rights. But it's implied. So it's A implies B, B is false, therefore A is false. And it's also not a necessary prerequisite for rights to be respected. So this argument, it doesn't work at all.
Institution that actually serves to extract that coercion from society. An institution that subordinates society to this moral idea of rights. That doesn't just happen. That's not something you negotiate. That is just something that is. It is a requirement.
It just is. It's a metaphysical given that you have this government which protects rights. No, clearly not.
For human thriving, for human flourishing, for freedom.
Okay, so yeah, now he's going on to the prerequisite point. Having this ideal government is a requirement for human flourishing and human freedom. I mean, he defined freedom before. It's the freedom to act, free of coercion. But again, me and Crusoe on the Friday, there isn't a necessity that there is some government over us. There is this ideal state over us. That could not be the case without Crusoe aggressing against me. Like, it doesn't imply that because there is none of this, that Crusoe necessarily aggresses against me. So, again, these sloppy formulations, they run into all sorts of issues like this. Now, I don't know how deep, necessarily, Caplan's going to get into all of this stuff. I mean, obviously, he's only got, 15 minutes for his opening statement. I don't necessarily know if he would be able to get into this much depth, tearing apart Yaron's every word. But these really are big problems with the sort of orthodox objectivist viewpoint. It doesn't work when you really analyze it. The things they say just actually don't bear out at all. Like, it doesn't actually make sense what they say. They just kind of gish gallop, and like they're kind of talking around what they really want to say. I'm not entirely sure. I'm not entirely sure what exactly it is they're wanting to say. But every time I try and come up with a more charitable interpretation of it, it just ends up being equally as stupid. It's like the old story with the pragmatists. They had this thesis of meaning, the theory of meaning. I believe it's called verificationism. where the meaning of some term, some concept, is the sense data which would prove it to be the case. They kept trying to like tweak their theory of meaning to include only things they think are meaningful and exclude things they think aren't meaningful. And every time they run into these issues, and it's like, that's the problem with these sort of top-down approaches, and I think they're doing the same thing when it comes to the objectivist politics. Because they always keep having to tweak it, add on more asterisks as they face edge cases. And you see this in a debate I did. Let's see here. Apologies for the stuffiness. Yeah. Oops. This debate here is against an objectivist. As I proceeded in the debate, I kept coming up with like more counterexamples. It's like, okay, well, what if a guy who gets to the patent office first? They're the first one to get it. Okay, well, what happens if they both get to the patent office at the same time? Well, it depends on which one gets signed. Okay, they're both literally, they slam it down at the exact same moment on the president's desk. Which one ought the president be signing? It's like, they can't handle these edge cases. These edge cases I like build my entire course around, where I can just swat them down one after the other. Of course, I've been faced with like, in the debate bro trenches before. So I know that these sorts of edge cases are gonna get thrown at me. But these like more primitive formulations from these types of people, they really have not considered any of the edge cases. They don't have a robust theory at all.
So individual rights necessitate government.
Again, no, it doesn't. That's not the case. Because, A implies B. B is false, therefore not A. Right? It's very simple, because Yaron's claim is that people do have these individual rights, and it necessitates like government. But he also has these examples of where there isn't a government, or where there isn't like a government which respects rights. It's not clear which thesis he's making exactly, but in both cases you have examples. So does he then think that, okay, well, that proves that you don't have individual rights? Like, no, you clearly still think that you do have individual rights. So you don't get to use this necessitates argument. Like, that has a very particular meaning here.
In order to bar physical force from social relationships, which we seem to, I think, all think that's a worthwhile cause, barring physical force from social relationship, well, who's going to do that? How is it going to be objectively done? How do we agree what force is in every circumstances? How do we do restitution and retribution?
Yeah, but let's just show you. Got a whole course on it. Proportionality right here. This is talking about theory of dialogical estoppel, just means of punishment. You can work these things out. That's how you do proper restitution. Now, of course, he's going to go into, well, you need a government to tell you how to do it. But it's like, nowhere else in philosophy do we have that standard. It's like, well, how do you know how to form a concept? We need a government to tell us how to form concepts. No, philosophy tells you that.
All of those need a mechanism. They need a mechanism, an objective mechanism, a mechanism of the rule of law. And over a particular geographic...
They need an objective mechanism to do that. This is kind of where objectivists get into like buzzwordy territory. What do you mean an objective mechanism? A mechanism that actually exists in reality? Or a mechanism that is based on the objective standards of philosophy? It's like, okay, maybe it means the latter. And why would that have to be in a specific geographic area? Why couldn't it be just the already determined anarcho-capitalist legal theory? Right? and why does it have to be in a particular geographic area? Like, does it have to be at a particular time of day? Do you want to add that caveat in? It needs to be in a particular geographic area, on a particular date, in a particular time of day, and they have to be wearing a particular type of shirt whilst they're doing it. It's like, well, yeah, technically, it would have to be in particular things. Anything in reality is a particular. But he's trying to say something different here. It's that, well, it needs to be a monopoly over this area. They have to exclude anybody else from getting into that area. It's like, why? Explain that. Just say that point, and explain it properly. Like,
area that requires a monopoly. So one objective law in one geographic.
Okay, yeah, one objective law in one geographic area. He's being a legal positivist here. He doesn't believe in his heart of hearts in natural law theory, because he's saying that you need to have that there could be law which is different in one area to the other area. But hold on, proper law is based on philosophy, so it doesn't change depending on where you are. Law is law. It just is what it is.
Location, where the use of force is under the control, guidance of an objective law determined by reason.
The use of force is under the guidance of an objective law determined by reason. So there you go. Yeah, it's determined by reason. Yeah, it'd be great if literally everybody just followed reason, and then knew the objective law, the non-aggression principle, the law that I go over. That would be great. But of course, some people won't do that. So the question is, how do you deal with these people? Well, it's a risk. It's a form of risk. How do you deal with risk on the market? If you form insurance firms, right? This is not difficult. One moment. Apologies, I thought I heard my cat screaming downstairs. But he's just being a maniac. Right.
So a proper government is the means by which we...
Oh, he did a big conflation there. He said the objective law based on reason, so therefore a proper government. It's like, whoa, big leap there.
Place retaliatory use of force under objective control and objectively defined laws in order for the purpose of protecting rights. Now notice, we talk about capitalism, we talk about free markets. But free markets assume something. They assume there's no coercion. They assume there's no force. That's what...
Okay, then there is no such thing as a free market. If there is no coercion or force, and like, you want coercion, you want force, you want them to be done by the government, then there is no such thing as a free market. Except for me and Crusoe on the desert island, where Crusoe happens to not be using force against me. It's like, is that the only instance of a free market? Like, come on, Yaron. You can just flip these right back at you.
Freedom means. Markets, to be free, have to be free of coercion. So the absence of coercion, the elimination of coercion comes first. The idea that defense agencies can compete on a, quote, free market for retaliatory force is incoherent. For a free market is one from which force has effectively already been banished.
No, because you also want there to be an agency doing the banishing, which involves using coercion, right? So the question is, does that have to be a single agency, or could it be multiple agencies? It could be multiple agencies. It's logically possible for multiple agencies to each be excluding coercion based on the objective standards of law set out by philosophy. That's entirely logically possible. So you can't use these terms like necessitates and all that sort of type of stuff when it's logically possible to have the alternative. You might want to make the argument that, well, it's way more likely that these competing firms, that they'll evolve into gang warfare. Okay, we'll make that argument, but that's not an actual necessity.
What defense agencies are actually trading in is in force, in the lack of freedom, in the use of its negation.
Okay, no, force again. isn't necessarily lack of. I mean, this is the problem with using sloppy definitions like freedom, right? Just using force in general, that's not necessarily conflict initiatory. It's not necessarily aggression, right? If I am using, if there's a guy who's shooting up a place, right, maybe like a shopping mall or whatever, and I use my gun to kill him, I'm using force against him. But this isn't creating conflicts. It's not depriving people of their rights. This is not a rights violation. Because again, this is the problem with these sloppy definitions, just using like force. I mean, sometimes they'll say retaliatory force or initiatory force. But really, it just does not get at the heart. Because I mean, am I using force against you when I defraud you? It's like, oh no, because we also mean initiatory force or initiatory fraud, or like they got to have all these extra caveats on there as more edge cases are shown to them. It's like they can't deal with it. They don't have a solid theoretic foundation. Are there more ANCAPs turning objectivist or objectivists turning ANCAP? There are a lot of objectivists turning anarcho-capitalists these days. I heard from a friend who was recently at Ocon, I believe it's called, that like most of the young objectivists there were at least aware of me, which is very good. So perhaps I would say objectivist turning ANCAP, but again, I don't really know. Yeah, Nicola says feels suspect it's the latter, that is objectivists turning ANCAP, because objectivism is stagnant as a movement. Yeah, it is very stagnant.
So, freedom, the ability of the individual to use his judgment for his own life, needs to be secured by a government that brings that force under some kind of objective control. Now look.
Under some kind of objective control. Yeah, because again, they're just very sloppy with the words here. Like, why is it that it's objective control when it's being done by one guy? Why not when it's being doing when I could go to any chieftain I want, and he would provide his services to me. Why? Which is exactly what happened in Iceland, by the way. Why is that not objective control? Like, what do you mean by that?
I'm not defending existing governments. Unfortunately, our institutions are being corrupted. They were maybe corrupt from the beginning, or at least had the seeds of that corruption from the beginning. But they certainly have been corrupted, and government has gotten worse over the last 100-something years, certainly in this country.
But gee whiz, Yaron, there was a constitution. How did that happen? It's almost like the philosophy of the day determines the type of society you're in. So if you have a good philosophy in a Gulch, which by the way is anarchy, if you have a good philosophy there, then yeah, it's gonna work. It'll be great. If you have a bad philosophy, doesn't matter if you have a government or not, it's gonna be bad. Yeah, no, Joltad, I can't stand Yaron. He refused to debate Disentral, because according to Yaron, debating people is an endorsement of their ideas, and he hates ANCAPs, and yet he's happy to debate communists. That is a very strange excuse. I believe somebody told him he should debate me on anarcho-capitalism, because they're pitching me as an anarcho-capitalist and an objectivist. And he was like, well, I don't really think you could be honest. I don't think it's possible to be an honest person and be both an anarcho-capitalist and an objectivist. It's like, okay, well, I mean, what the fuck? And then you just excluded any form of debate. It's like, oh, I don't really want to debate that. Well, I don't think you can be honest and think that, so therefore I'm not going to debate you. Like, well, are communists honest? It's like, oh, I guess we don't debate communism anymore. It's like, he will only debate people like Bryan Caplan. He's fine debating Bryan Caplan because Bryan Caplan doesn't claim to be an objectivist. It's like, okay, so then you've excluded people who have the correct philosophical foundations already. It's nonsense.
And in parts of Europe. But the fact that an institution has been corrupted does not mean we erase it. We reject it. Universities are corrupt. Our healthcare system is corrupt. We don't reject healthcare and reject universities. We go.
But the question is then, are universities per se corrupt? Or is there a legitimate function they can perform? There is a legitimate function they can perform. Same with hospitals, right? But what is the legitimate function that a monopoly a monopoly on the use of force could perform? Well, a monopoly, as we know from the Austrians, means that you're excluding any competition, you're keeping out any competition. Okay, so then you are preventing anybody else from being able to enforce rights, right? Am I allowed to use self-defense? Well, maybe we can allow self-defense. Again, modify the theory a little bit, just like the pragmatists. Okay, we'll allow self-defense, so it's not a total monopoly. You can have your self-defense. It's like, okay, well, what if I see somebody else is about to be mugged, and I defend them? Okay, well, you can defend others. Okay, well, what if they want to pay me to defend them? Oh, hold on, suddenly when it becomes the capitalist transaction, that's a bridge too far. Or also, maybe they do allow that. Okay, they can pay you, but only if you did it altruistically at first. You altruistically just saved them, and they're so grateful that they gave you money for your services. It's like, okay, what if I want to? If I say, hey, this is a really dangerous neighborhood, if you pay me to be your bodyguard, I'll protect you from any future muggings against you. So okay, maybe we don't allow that. And it's very quickly you end up in anarcho-capitalism. It's not a long road there, because therefore this monopoly where you're preventing these things, that's illegitimate by its nature. So it's not the same as, oh well, it just happens to be corrupted. It is corrupt to its core. It's necessarily corrupt. And again, I'm using the term correctly. Necessarily means something. It doesn't just mean, well, it might happen. Yes, come on.
Go in and fix them. We identify what's wrong, we identify what the problem is, we identify the source of the corruption, and we eradicate the source of the corruption. So government today is corrupt. It's just another gang. But to throw it out completely, rather than figure out what's wrong.
Figure out what's wrong. What is your diagnosis here, Yaron? What is your diagnosis for what's wrong? If it's not going to be the anatomy of the state argument that it's just a gang of thieves, which is inherently wrong. What is your diagnosis here, Yaron? Please tell us, what is wrong with governments today?
Is, in my view, a disaster. The absence of government.
No, we don't know. Okay, there's some unspecified problem with government which is making it corrupt, which isn't that it's necessarily corrupt. But we don't have time. We don't have time for that. Okay, whatever. Admetos, thank you for the $5 Australian. Did you see my question on YouTube? If not, would you be okay with me DMing you it on Discord and later to answer it later on in the stream? Up to you. Yeah, sure. DM me. And you can also put it in the chat if you want. Yes, anyway.
The absence of a monopoly over the use of force is chaos. It's violence. It's civil war.
Again, civil war, he's using these terms, which he doesn't really apparently understand particularly well. Like, no, it's not civil war. Civil war is when you have this monopoly on the use of force, you have this state, you have this government, and there are two groups fighting over that central power. That's what civil war means. Tori Scott, thank you for the £2. Brook debated Tam Laird on Anarcho-Capitalism, but not you. Yeah, well, I guess I'll have to, I don't know, figure out how to debate him. I don't know. Just change into Beamer mode. How and when do you think it would be appropriate to prevent an aggression before it happens? I'd be happy to take a direction to some reading on this if you know of any. For example, we obviously believe in open borders. What if the soldiers of a foreign army began flooding into the area? Have yet to aggress? Blah blah blah. So you aren't actually allowed to stop any aggression before the aggression occurs. But there's a very important point here. If I pull out a gun and point it at you, I'm already aggressing against you. I'm already implicitly threatening your life. That's already the aggression. Now, that doesn't mean that you can have like this minority report. You look into the future and you can see that I will do this eventually. No, because I have free will. You might be able to say potentially this guy will commit a crime, but until he's actually committing the crime, until it's an actual, you're not allowed to stop him. Because otherwise it's like, well, I know how to prevent every crime ever. From this moment on, what we do is we blow up Earth, and then there will be no more crime ever, and I'll save the world. It's like, yeah, I mean, you've prevented any potential crimes, but that is itself a crime. It is a crime to try and prevent potential crime, because potential crime isn't actual crime.
Force becomes a tool for human interaction. It's not banished, as government should do, but it is embedded in the system. It is something to be negotiated. It is something to be facilitated between the different agencies competing for your dollar in your defense and to retaliate in your name.
Let me just run that back a little bit. Wasn't paying enough attention to what he's saying.
It's civil war. Force becomes a tool for human interaction. It's not banished, as government.
Again, government doesn't banish physical force. It doesn't get rid of it entirely. You're just vesting it into a monopoly. That doesn't get rid of it, right? It's not a magic wand which says, hear ye, there'll be no crime. Like, neither of us have that, Yaron.
Should do. But it is embedded in the system. It is something to be negotiated. It is something to be facilitated between the different agencies competing for your dollar in your defense and to retaliate in your name.
It's like, well, the different governments in the world. I mean, maybe your own is one of these types who thinks there should be a one world government. But to the extent that you have multiple governments, well, then they're each competing for your tax dollars. That's happening right now. Governments compete for your tax dollars. And so then what if we change it from this world into the world of like 1,000 Liechtensteins, right? Well, then there's going to be more competition between these people. Okay, well, let's turn it into 10 million Liechtensteins. Okay, well, then there's going to be even more competition. Very quickly, as you do this sort of Hoppian shrinking down, oops, you arrive at, well, they can't actually maintain a geographical center anymore. So they'll compete for all sorts of people, not in a specific territory. They can no longer maintain a monopoly. It's like, well, gee whiz. At what point in this continuum does Yaron say, no? Maybe he is the extreme case of there has to be a one world government, or else you've got some level of competition for people competing for terrible. We can't have competition, of course. People competing to defend your rights, at least ostensibly. Like, terrible competition. I can't imagine being a capitalist.
My name, your name, I have my own. How they resolve disputes has nothing to do with rights.
Why doesn't it have anything to do with rights? Again, the type of society you have depends on the philosophy of the day. Why is the philosophy of the day necessarily, again, using that word specifically, why is it necessarily, when you have competition, that it's necessarily nothing to do with rights? Nobody cares about rights anymore. It's like, whoa, how are you making this connection?
And everything to do with a power struggle among them. It becomes...
Well, same with government. Governments certainly aren't immune to power struggles. Like, are we serious? Like, every fucking 4 years in the United States, there's a power struggle. It must be total chaos.
War, we are politique. And we can see how different entities negotiate. They negotiate until one party...
I wonder how... Maybe this just didn't download properly. I'm going to switch over to YouTube.
Well,
I'm 10 minutes in. Like that just is not looking good.
among them. It becomes war. We are politique. And we can see how different entities negotiate. They negotiate until one party feels strong enough to take over the other party.
Is that true in governments as well? Is it impossible for the different political parties, again, in the United States, is it impossible for them to negotiate? Do they necessarily devolve into civil war? It's like, the same criticism as applied to government. Is it necessarily going to be a fight for power to see who can dominate the other? Like, this is ludicrous.
Anarchy gives a new twist to the term hostile takeover. Is there any doubt that the guys with the bigger guns, the guys who are convinced that they could dominate, will try to dominate?
Yeah. Yeah, there is. Okay, so what we really need to do is make one group of people have all the biggest guns. Is there any doubt that they wouldn't try to dominate? Like, come on, Yaron. This is so simple. Really, it's very simple. If you have the right philosophy, then you wouldn't have this attempted domination. It's very, very easy to just turn these arguments back at you. Thank you for the $3, Monhop. Someone tell him that Galt's Gulch is a covenant community. Yeah, exactly. Like, it's one guy, he privately owns all this land, and he sells off parcels of it on the condition that you, agree with their philosophy. It's a covenant community. There's a restrictive covenant that you're not allowed to bring in any of the outside money. You're not allowed to, do all this sort of stuff. It's a restrictive covenant. What do we call those communities which live under a restrictive covenant? Covenant communities.
And isn't it better for us if our agency has more people under it than fewer people under it? So even the consumers.
Not necessarily. Isn't it better for you if Starbucks, if you must always go to Starbucks because Starbucks has more customers, so they must make the best coffee for your needs. It's like, not necessarily. Maybe I want a specific type of agency to fit my specific use cases. Maybe I'm a higher risk individual and the big firms, they won't sell insurance to me. Okay, well then I've got to go to a more niche firm, right? I've got to go more niche. That's the thing with competition here.
Would be supportive. And, whatever might get called as rule of law or objective process adjudication, where does it come from? What kind of process?
Where does it come from? That's a very telling question. Objective law, where does it come from? Well, it doesn't fucking come from anywhere. Like, again, this is I would advise people to just give at least a skim of this article. This is what he's defending. This is the thesis that he's defending. That law has to come from somewhere, that's a social fact. It's like, well, that's not clear at all, especially if we're going to have a natural rights theory. Is rights nothing to do with law? Like, this is kind of crazy. And, like, it just goes unstated that he's even adopting a certain type of thesis here. Like, legal positivists do this all the damn time. They'll just leave it completely unstated. It's just a frozen abstraction that law just means legal positivism. It's like, well, actually, defend that thesis. How about that?
Process brings it about. It's just a terms for kind of an amoral truce, momentary truce, between rival gangs, each ready to force concessions on the other. And look, anarchy exists today. In every place the government leaves a little room for competing with it, you have anarchy.
And those are the freest markets on earth, when the government leaves a little bit of room, when the government retracts. Wherever the government retracts, it's better. It's better than otherwise. Like, let's take Porkfest. There's not a whole lot of government in Porkfest. It's pretty much Ancapistan there. I mean, you can buy a whole lot of interesting things there, which the government just leaves alone. One of the most peaceful places on earth. Like, I can't remember any instance of there being like some sort of horrific crime committed at Porkfest. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I haven't been yet. Maybe if I go there, I'll see like, oh my god, it's total gang warfare. This is terrible. There's shootouts constantly. Like, that is not the impression I get from what I've heard of it.
Government leaves spaces and things that it bans. That's how we get organized crime, cartels, mafias.
Whoa! Government leaves space. The drug war. Yeah, that's the government really lightening up. That's the government pulling away from drug enforcement. They really pulled away there. They've left this space for the market to flourish, and that's the U.S. policy on drugs, is to just leave alone, laissez-faire. Just do whatever you want, and we won't get involved. Yeah, that's U.S. policy on drugs for sure. Yeah, absolutely.
And yes, it's competition between gangs, between the mafia, the cartels, and the government. Government being one of the gangs that is being in competition. Neighborhood gangs compete with one another because the space, the police won't go in there. So the space is being left free for them to provide security services, to collect, security funds, to protect you, protection money. And they have truces, they get together, there's no question. It's not always violence, there's not a war ongoing. They have a truce until somebody sees a small advantage and leaps and takes over.
I mean, is that true of governments? Like, again, just every argument he makes, just flip it around and point it right back at him. It's very easy.
I mean, just go to the West Bank or the Gaza Strip in Israel, but it's not exactly Israel,
Can this guy go one fucking debate without bringing up Israel? Jesus Christ.
where Israel has withdrawn in a sense. And what you get is, yeah, you've got a police force of the PLO and a police force of Hamas, and they sometimes negotiate. And
Yeah, I think yeah, Israeli policy regarding the West Bank, I would certainly describe that as a laissez-faire. Let's pull back control. That's definitely yeah, for sure, absolutely.
most of the time they shoot at each other, and one party usually wins and dominates a particular geographic area because that's what happens to anarchy. It turns into an authoritarian state. And then they...
Why an authoritarian state there, Yaron? All your argument would establish, if I were to grant its premises, is that one group would take over. Why is that necessarily an authoritarian group? Why wouldn't it be your perfect minarchy? Maybe you think competition just it doesn't work here, so it'll tend towards a monopoly. Maybe you think that there is such a thing as a natural monopoly here. Whatever, okay. But why would it necessarily, again, precise word, why would it necessarily be an authoritarian government? Like, whoa, what if the philosophy of the day doesn't allow for authoritarianism? Whoops daisies, then it's not going to be an authoritarian government. Necessarily, not the case. Not necessarily the case, I should say.
They control that particular piece of geographic area, and they exclude the other. And in that sense, because we have not created an institution that bars the initiation of force, because we haven't created an institution that banishes force, we legitimize its use. You're competing over it. We're protecting different interests.
Well, again, is the use of force, is that not legitimate on your system, Yaron? And you think there is a legitimate function of government, and its only legitimate function, you think, is using force against people. So there is such thing as legitimate use of force on your system, Yaron. It's like, very easy. Just in your head, Yaron. You should just, when you come up with one of these arguments, just try to apply it to the state. And see how far it gets you.
And you can always imagine a security force that is protecting, I don't know, the interests of minorities. I don't know, those who hate abortions and want to persecute the doctors who have abortions. I don't know what the position of this audience with regard to copyrights are, but I'm sure there's disagreement. Well, my agency wants to protect copyrights, and Bryan's agency doesn't want to protect copyrights. What do we do?
Yeah, so this is he's assuming that competing over rights enforcement means competing over providing law. He's conflating anarcho-capitalism and polycentrism. There's a dreadful error here. Because anarcho-capitalism, again, it doesn't say that it's not legal positivist. Of course, he only knows about legal positivism, so he thinks that everybody else must be a legal positivist, where they think we just want there to be multiple sources of law. No, I am an acentrist. I want there to be no source of law. There is no source of law. There is the objective law set by philosophy. Okay, set by philosophy again. And multiple people are able to use their minds to figure out that things like intellectual property is utterly nonsense. They'll be able to figure this out. So the people who are trying to enforce these intellectual monopolies, they're bad. I'm opposed to them. Now, how do you prevent them from enforcing that? Well, gee whiz, yeah, I go to the local archmage and I say, hey, can you put out a spell which will prevent anybody from being able to enforce things I don't like? It's like, yeah, that's what I do.
Half of a copyright, we negotiate sometimes. Sometimes we do it. What about sex with children or any other horrific thing you can think of? What if there's a specific agency protecting the people who are willing to engage in those activities? And what if they have big guns and you don't want to mess with them because it's too expensive?
Well, then I consult Gandalf. That's what happens if that happens. Like, what happens if a big government rises up and they call themselves Germany and they're the National Socialist German Workers' Party, and they decided to do all these horrible things that you can think of. What then? Oh, gee whiz, yeah, you get the wizard over. That's what you do. Like, this is the same for both absence of government and government. It's the same. Either could turn out bad. So it's a question of which do you expect to turn out bad. Answer, just like everywhere else, it's the one where there's a fucking monopoly. That's the one you expect to turn out bad.
So it's too costly. And you think there's adverse selection? Sure. But there are markets for adverse selection type risks. And you pay a higher premium, a significant higher premium, so you get the defense you need for the horrific acts that you engage in.
That's true right now. That's true right now. Literally right now. I guarantee you, if I had $50 quintillion in like sound money, I could buy out a government. It wouldn't be difficult. There is this thing called bribery. So right now, if I had high enough money, I could enforce whatever I want. Surely, right? I must be able to enforce whatever I want. It's like, whoops. Yeah, there is actually this thing called the philosophy of the day, which people might object to me saying, hey, I want to pay the US government to start murdering people. Just on the street, I want to point at someone and have them murder that person. It's like, would I be able to get away with that? Probably not.
But it's all possible. It's anarchy. There's no objective standard of law. There's no individual rights. There's no absolute.
And again, he's conflating objective standard of law, which is a philosophical term, right, with there has to be somebody there to make it objective. It's like nonsense.
Protection of those rights. So what is right? What are individual rights is now open to competition, can be now challenged in the so-called marketplace.
Yeah. Again, he's saying competition in what are the rights. No, that's not the claim anarcho-capitalists are making at all. That's the polycentrist claim.
And there's a sense in which today's political system is more similar to anarchy than it is to proper capitalism.
Nonsense. yeah. There's a real tiny government. It's basically nothing. It's basically nothing. There's basically no governments in the world. Like, what is this gaslighting he keeps doing? Like, oh yeah, it's like doublespeak. Yeah, Israel's policy on Gaza, that's real laissez-faire. They just leave it alone. US policy on drugs, that's real laissez-faire. They just leave it alone. There's basically no government at all. We're pretty close to anarcho-capitalism, guys. It's like, what are you even saying here? This is nonsense. Gaslighting. That's what it is.
We have pressure groups, gangs, trying to get their way. Yes, you know, some of it's money, some of it's votes, but the point is that our rights are not protected. We as individuals. Force is not banished from our society. It's competed over by all these pressure groups in our political.
Okay, so I am curious if Yaron would be in favor of some sort of a monarchy. Then maybe he is. Maybe he agrees with sort of the Hoppian argument against democracy, but I wouldn't put much stake into it because these orthodox objectivists, they seem to really love democracy a whole lot. But then you've still got these pressure groups, you've still got these competition. In fact, even under monarchy, you've still got different pressure groups trying to get into control, like anytime, everywhere. Again, all of his criticisms apply equally to the state. The Luke Show for 31 Australian dollars. Thank you very much. Loved your course, Zulu. Keep kicking ass. I've been trying to implement anarcho-capitalism principles to the pro wrestling scene in Australia. It's very cool. Thank you very much for the money.
Political system trying to take stuff away from us, trying to take our liberty away from us. We're much closer to anarchy today than we are to true freedom and to true.
Getting gaslighting. I mean, it makes sense if he thinks that the US policy on drugs is laissez-faire. You'd think we're pretty close to anarchy because we've got the biggest governments in the world at the moment. So yeah, it must be pretty close to government. Sorry, must be pretty close to anarchy then.
True capitalism. Democracy is, you do whatever you want to your neighbor, provided your gang is bigger than his, bigger in terms of size. Anarchy, you do whatever you please to your neighbor, provided your gang is stronger.
Okay, so what is Yaron's? What system does he want? If he thinks that democracy is super close to anarchy, because it's just gangs versus gangs, does he want the wizard spell system, where you just hear ye, zippity doo dah? I'm making it such that nobody will ever try and use their gang to overpower anybody else ever again. Kazam. Right? Is that the system he's advocating for? It sounds a whole lot like a floating abstraction, a naive floating abstraction, perhaps.
Yeah, more powerful than his. Same principle. I see, I'm almost out of time. All right. Look, I know there's a whole literature that tries to explain how all this could work under anarchy. I get it. It's a fascinating intellectual endeavor. But to quote Ayn Rand, it's naive, floating abstractions, or in my vocabulary.
Yeah, they can't help themselves. I just said that, and of course, that's what he goes on to.
Rationalistic fantasy. In reality, in this world, anarchy leads to violence, war, civil war. It's a complete.
And you notice how, I mean, this is an aside, but he sounds very similar to like the pragmatists like Dave Smith and whatnot. It's like, well, in reality, in the real world, it's like, the theory's correct. The theory's about reality. Come on.
Disaster. Thank you.
It's for the negative. I take it away, Bryan.
All right.
Anarcho-capitalism would be a complete disaster for humanity. It's my opponent, Yaron Brook, who was the one who requested this strong resolution, not me. Still, if I was debating a normal, economically literate human being before a normal, economically literate audience, I would be worried. Fortunately, my opponent is a proponent of Ayn Rand's objectivism, and this is the Soho Forum. So we all agree on some basic principles of how markets work. Most notably, rational self-interest, plus free competition, plus reputation, normally yields excellent results for both consumers and producers. Since Ayn Rand and Yaron Brook embrace this principle, they are sanguine about what libertarians call minarchy, a society where government provides nothing except, to quote John Galt's speech in Atlas Shrugged, the police to protect you from criminals, the army to protect you from foreign invaders, and the courts to protect your property and contracts from breach or fraud by others, to settle disputes by rational rules according to objective law. Right now.
And yeah, it's curious. Like, obviously he's going to go into this. It's like, why would that necessarily lead to better outcomes? Why would you even expect it to have this all monopolized? It doesn't make any sense.
Now, let's imagine a glorious future where minarchy sweeps the world. Here is my question for Brook. When minarchy sweeps the world, will it be a complete disaster for humanity if multiple independent countries continue to exist? If you answer yes, you're obviously wrong.
He's making, yeah, the argument I was making earlier, that, hey, if you can just keep cutting this down, does it have to be a one world government, or can you cut it down to multiple? Would that be a complete disaster? Okay, well, let's cut it down further. Let's cut it down further, and keep cutting it down until they are not able to maintain any sort of monopoly. Like, at what point does it become a complete disaster?
Before 1945, you might have argued with some plausibility that world government is the only way to prevent World War III. Now we know better. Having multiple independent countries isn't a complete disaster for humanity, even in the philosophically corrupt, horribly statist world of today. Indeed, there is now a long list of adjacent countries where the probability of violent conflict is near zero. The US and Canada, Norway and Sweden. Even, students of history, drop your jaws. France and Germany. So what? If you don't answer yes to will it be a complete disaster for humanity if multiple independent countries continue to exist, you're stuck with no. And once you say no, the next obvious question is, under minarchy, will it be a complete disaster for humanity if the world has a lot of small independent countries? If you say yes, I'll respond, why? If you say no, you've already accepted something that is functionally equivalent to one prominent version of anarcho-capitalism. The version I have in mind, a society where businesses contractually acquire sizable tracts of land, then provide police, courts, and so on as part of the package deal. When conflict spills over their borders, they adjudicate their disputes much as the United States and Canada do today. If you object, the stronger business will just forcibly impose its will on the weaker business, you've got to explain why the US doesn't forcibly impose its will on Canada, which it obviously does not, for a great many reasons. Most notably, A, both sides morally oppose using military force to resolve marginal disputes. B, peaceful
Yeah, again, that is, yeah, the philosophy argument, that the philosophy of the day determines the type of society you have. If you have people who morally oppose these things, then it's not going to happen.
diplomacy works tolerably well. C, the cost of bloodshed exceeds the gain, even for the winner. Now, you could definitely argue that having lots of small countries in a minarchist world is somewhat inconvenient. Still, if you think minarchy would be a big improvement over the status quo, the net effect of moving from the world of today to a minarchist world with inconveniently small countries remains a major improvement. And a major improvement over the blatantly non-disastrous status quo is no disaster. Can you really say that anarcho-capitalism and minarchy with lots of small countries are equivalent? There's only one notable difference. Unlike governments, businesses under anarcho-capitalism have to acquire all their land through voluntary contracts with individual property owners. No eminent domain, no equivocation between democracy and voluntarism. The difference is, in Nozick's word, historical. Did the system arise in a morally exemplary way? Functionally, however, it doesn't matter. Once established, this version of anarcho-capitalism and minarchy with lots of small countries work the same way. Now, what about regular anarcho-capitalism, where people get personal subscriptions to police courts and so on instead of buying a package deal from the real estate developer?
Like I do again, I would have objected to this framing of the debate that it's, anarcho-capitalism is some particular bureaucratic structure. I mean, that's the resolution he's got, so.
Once you can see that lots of small minarchic countries can peacefully resolve their cross-border disputes, we can go further. The borders don't have to be geographical. They can be organizational. Right now, for example, if two customers of the same insurance company get into a car accident, the insurance company handles the dispute internally. If two customers of different insurance companies get into an accident, the two insurance companies handle the dispute contractually. The economically illiterate will insist the companies will never agree. They'll fight it out in court to the bitter end. In the real world, however, the insurance industry has developed intricate systems of adjudication that keep almost all of their disputes out of dysfunctional government courts. A regular anarcho-capitalism would work the same way. If two parties to dispute subscribe to the same protection agency, the agency handles the dispute internally. Otherwise, the two agencies handle the dispute contractually. The economically illiterate will insist. The agencies will never agree. They'll fight it out in the streets to the bitter end. But in an established anarcho-capitalist society, this makes about as much sense as worrying that Sweden will become a dictatorship and invade Norway. Which brings us to the big question of why Sweden won't become a dictatorship and invade Norway. Because for most of its history, Sweden was a dictatorship and did repeatedly invade Norway. Here's my answer to this big question. Suppose in the year 1200 AD, a Swede gave a speech advocating democracy and calling for perpetual peace with Norway. I submit that all of the other Vikings would have laughed at his naivete. They would have laughed at the idea of democracy. If the strongest Jarl doesn't win the election, he'll just murder the winner and take over. And they would have laughed at the idea of perpetual peace with Norway. Whatever the Norwegians say, they'll invade at the first sign of a weakness. And in 1200 AD, the laughing Vikings would have been correct.
Yeah, I do like the way he's kind of reframing. Yaron is trying to sort of conflate anarchism and democracy, and he is like throwing these arguments back at Yaron. It's like, well, what, and you, it too, Brutier, right? So I think this is a good tactic to take.
When most people expect dictatorship and war are stable. And
Yeah, again, this is the philosophy of history point, where the philosophy of the day determines the type of society you have. If you have a warlike philosophy, you're going to get war.
anyone who expects anything else seems crazy. Today, however, imagine that the Prime Minister of Sweden gave a speech advocating dictatorship and calling for an invasion of Norway. Not only would the other Swedes laugh at him, they'd assume he was trying to make them laugh. If the Prime Minister persisted, he would be peacefully removed from power. The lesson: in a society where most people expect democracy and peace are stable, and anyone who expects anything else seems crazy. So what? If you claim that anarcho-capitalism would be a complete disaster for humanity if it were tried today, like right now, I fully agree. But the problem isn't that anarcho-capitalism fails to provide good incentives, or the system logically collapses into gang warfare. The problem is expectations. Moving from democracy to stable anarcho-capitalism, moving from stable democracy to stable anarcho-capitalism is like moving from stable dictatorship to stable democracy. Shifting expectations is very hard, but the problem is the transition, not the destination. Depressing? Kind of. The good news is that once we get to minarchy, the last step to anarcho-capitalism is minuscule. I'm going to end by showing you how minuscule. Under minarchy, government provides dispute resolution, rule formation, and enforcement. Many even claim that some or all these functions must be a government monopoly. Yet none of these functions are monopolies even in the statist world of today. And most of what government does could easily be offloaded to the private sector, especially when the private sector flourishes in the glorious light of laissez-faire.
Yeah, that's a good response to like, well, this necessarily has to be a monopoly. Well, it's like, currently, it isn't a monopoly, so...
Dispute resolution. Even today, you don't need government to resolve most disputes. If you allow binding private arbitration, almost everyone with a contractual relation will eagerly opt out of the court system. If government courts declared, we don't handle disputes between people with contractual relations, you should have included an arbitration clause, even more people will opt out. You near the final frontier when government judges say, you're total strangers, fine. We'll appoint an arbitrator, goodbye. Rule formation. Even today, private arbitrators make their own rules. The main limit, no rule arbitration, is truly binding because governments can and will overrule you if displeased. Under minarchy, binding arbitration would have free reign, and government lawmakers would have almost nothing left to do. Enforcement. Even today, private arbitrators enforce their own rulings through reputation, ostracism, and bonding. If you don't pay your bills, the main sanction is just a bad credit rating. Under minarchy, again, arbitrators and everyone else could use these sanctions freely. The final frontier is when government courts say, you signed a binding arbitration contract that allows them to jail you? I have no jurisdiction. Almost everyone in this room is used to arguing for radical free market policies. Almost everyone in this room knows.
I mean, he is kind of taking the more polycentrist route, where it's like, well, if you sign the contract, then it's all kosher. I don't think this is a very precise way of thinking about things.
The standard inventory of statist objections. Though I'm eager to answer your objections, I think you can answer most of them yourselves using arguments you've already used 100 times in other contexts. If you think adults should have the right to inject as much heroin as they want and deny the results will be a disaster for humanity, you shouldn't lose sleep over adults' right to sign fully binding arbitration contracts. In The Nature of Government, Ayn Rand called anarchy a floating abstraction, but then claimed that anarcho-capitalism was even worse. One cannot call this theory a contradiction in terms, since it is obviously devoid of any understanding of the terms competition and government. Nor can one call it floating abstraction, since it is devoid of any contact with or reference to reality and cannot be concretized at all, not even roughly or approximately. Since you've read Atlas Shrugged, you know Ayn Rand is wrong. Why? Because Ayn Rand herself concretized anarcho-capitalism with great clarity. Remember Galt's Gulch? Rand's Utopia of Greed? Here's how superbanker Midas Mulligan explained it. We are not a state here, not a society of any kind. We're just a voluntary association of men held together by nothing but every man's self-interest. I own the valley, and I sell the land to others when they want it. Judge Narragansett is to act as our arbiter in case of disagreements. He hasn't had to be called upon as yet. They say that it's hard for men to agree. You'd be surprised how easy it is when both parties hold as their moral absolute that neither exists for the sake of the other.
GG, thank you for the $10. Finally joined the Aussie Dono clan. What is the best way to deal with arguments for stopping bad thing by preventing everyone from doing it? Example, drugs, gambling, etc. So, I think, Bastiat, he has a good way of approaching this type of thing, where it's like, hey, just because we oppose to the government doing something, doesn't mean we oppose to the government, doesn't mean we oppose to that thing being done. So we oppose government education. That doesn't mean we oppose education, right? And it's the same on the flip side. I might oppose being like a degenerate gambler and spending all of your money. I oppose that. But that doesn't mean that we need to get the government in. It's a conflation between law and ethics, where law must completely encompass ethics entirely. It's a sloppy way of thinking about it. Like, you just don't even have any sort of freedom at that point. You don't have any freedom to do anything. If you have free will and you have rights, then you have rights to do things that are untoward. You have rights to make choices. Otherwise, you're in a total like command economy where the government says, okay, you're going to choose this option. Okay, you're going to choose this option. It's the little dictator sitting there telling you what to do at every step. This completely destroys the entire means that you use to survive in the first place. The means you use to survive, namely, your rational judgment, right? But rational judgment means you have to be free to make the choices. Otherwise, you can't pursue any values anymore. It destroys humanity. It's trying to turn humanity into automata. So it's like, yeah, it's effectively equivalent to trying to kill everybody but one man. Like, that's not good.
And the reason is their only means of trade. Fortunately, Rand asks too much. You don't need enthusiastic support to sustain a political system. Even reluctant fatalism will do. Democracy becomes stable once most people expect it to be stable. Minarchy will be stable once most people expect it to be stable. Anarcho-capitalism will be stable once most people expect it to be stable. If and when they do, there will be no disaster for humanity, just the second renaissance. Thank you.
Thank you. So it's interesting, the examples being used. This idea of nations peacefully dealing with one another when there is expectation of nations seems both ahistorical and weird for the time, given what's going on between Russia and Ukraine right now. Who would have thought, just very recently, that in Europe there would be a major land war in which thousands of people.
Well, yeah, because it's not like, I mean, yeah, Russia and Ukraine, they've been best of pals the whole time. They've just been so peaceful. It's like, again, he loves gaslighting. Yeah, Russia's policy to Ukraine throughout the past, since the Soviet Union has fallen, even during the Soviet Union, yes, it's been just laissez-faire. They've just been leaving it alone, and then suddenly, for no reason at all, they decided to go to war. It's like this is so sloppy. If that's the responding to the critics video, I've seen it. I've had it linked in the discussion I've had already. But they get hung up on you saying objectivism isn't true philosophy. What do you mean by that? Oh, as in like the floating abstract, sort of the frozen abstraction. So I assume you're saying that they are saying that I am making the claim that objectivism means true philosophy. I actually respond to that specifically in the video, that I'm not saying that. I'm saying objectivism is the philosophy of the primacy of existence. Now, that happens to be correct. It is correct. I believe that. But it's not like if I discovered tomorrow that the primacy of consciousness is actually the correct way of doing aesthetics. I would then say, well, I'm no longer an objectivist. Because this is true, but it's not based on the primacy of existence.
Soldiers and innocents lay dead. So yes, I believe multiple countries would exist, should exist.
Okay, then the principle is established. Okay, at what point of this truncating does it become a problem?
I believe it will always be stable and always peaceful? No, not necessarily. Why? One of the reasons why a government should have a military force that is able to protect its own citizens from those of other countries that might not share in values, or where the values will have shifted. That happens too. A stable Sweden might not be so stable in a few years. Just think of the changes, just to take an issue Bryan is very good on, that we share. Just think of the shift in Sweden on the issue of immigration and how dramatic it has happened in a fairly short period of time. So countries change. The status quo.
Redacted for $2 Australian. Thank you very much. What is your stance on tabula rasa? I agree with it. I don't think innate ideas make sense. I think it's a violation of causality. And also, like, let's just consider. Let's say you were born with some innate knowledge. Well, in what sense can you even call that knowledge? Because what is the guarantee that this actually aligns with reality or not? And it's not just a delusion. Like, there is no, for actual empirically gaining knowledge, there's an easy way to have a correspondence theory of truth. Is that, well, it corresponds to reality because I'm directly perceiving reality. It's like, okay. But if it's an innate idea, there is no connection to reality there. It just comes out of nowhere. Again, violation of causality. And that's where you start getting into wackadoodle ideas like Hegel.
Changes. And could one imagine the Swedes and the Norwegians going to war? Hard today, but not impossible. Not impossible at all. So I don't get this illusion to other countries. It is absolutely true that if you have a piece of land and you institute law on the piece of land and you institute security on that piece of land, then you're instituting a government on that piece of land. So yeah.
Okay, it's my house. Is this a dictatorship now? My house. I give some certain rules, and I'm real big and strong, so I can prevent burglars from coming in. Is that a dictatorship? Is that the correct way to describe that? It's, whoa, yeah, Stalin? What are you, a dictator? It's like, is this the correct way to describe this? I don't see how that's the case at all. Annie, for €4, thank you very much. Yaron Brook was fine with the IDF kidnapping Thunberg. Well, that's horrible. I mean, obviously, Greta Thunberg is a very bad person, but I don't think she should be kidnapped. If he's in favor of that, I'm definitely opposed to him on that.
Corporations buying large tracts of land and each having their own government is government. It's not anarchy. Whether that is a good thing or a bad thing, put aside, but it certainly is not anarchy. Let's take the insurance examples and the private security examples and dispute resolutions examples. I mean, all these, yeah, they happen. People resolve disputes all the time, privately. In a system of government. In a system where there is a law.
Right, but, I mean, Caplan's argument was, well, we can just keep peeling off parts of the government. It's like, because your argument was that it necessarily has to be a monopoly, that you can't have it without monopoly. It's like, okay, well, what about these examples where it's done privately? It's like, of course you can have it done privately, but this is under a monopoly. It's like, you can have this competition, but it has to be a monopoly. It's like, okay, well, what the fuck?
Where there is an understanding of what that law stands for, within the framework provided by a reasonably good system of law that we have today, lots of private things can happen. That's the beauty of setting up an objective system of law. Yes, under such a system, there would be some dispute resolutions, some private arbitrations, but there will also be circumstances where...
But then it's not a true monopoly. There is some competition. It's like, okay, well, if there can be some amount of competition, why not more than that? Okay, and why not more than that? And why not more than that? And very quickly, it's like, he's clearly making an arbitrary distinction here.
People don't agree, where private resolution is not possible.
Oh yeah, of course, if people don't agree, then we need to get Joseph Stalin over here and give him all the power, and then he can decide. It's like, well, okay, well, what if people in the government don't agree? What if I don't agree with the government? Is the government necessarily adhering to the objective standards of law? It's like, it's not clear at all.
Resolution deteriorates into violence, and where you need an impartial, objective.
I mean, yeah, there are some cases where there's violence. Sometimes people aren't able to agree, and then they're back to fighting. It's like, what do you want? That's true under the state. Like, go to any bar on Friday, sit outside it for a while, and you'll see people sometimes deteriorate into violence. This is true. This is true of every system. Sometimes people just go back to fighting. So how do you stop that fighting? You spread the good philosophy. If you spread the correct philosophy and people are rational, then they're going to be far less liable to be going into fighting. It's like, what do you want? Do you want this magic wand? I've got a magic wand. Don't worry, Yaron. Once we achieve Anarcho-Capitalism, I'll use my magic wand to make sure nobody ever descends into fighting ever again. Like, this is a ridiculous burden.
Arbitrator to step in and to be the ultimate authority with regard to these disputes. Justice also requires retribution. It requires going out and finding the murderer. That is a tricky activity. It's a tricky activity under any circumstances. But when you have multiple police forces, multiple system of governance, multiple agencies...
It's actually easier if you have multiple agencies. Like, I mean, why do you think bounty hunters exist? Because the police, they don't have the resources, they can't be bothered to do these things. But a bounty hunter, he gets paid. He gets paid by the bondsman, right? It's private, and sometimes you might have multiple bounty hunters going after the same guy. There's competition there. This must descend into gang warfare, of course. Like, it's ludicrous.
The idea that they all can resolve to not have collateral damage in retribution is, I think, again, more of a fantasy than anything else. But what about Gold's Gulch? Now, it is true. There is one circumstance where I can imagine, and I might be excommunicated for this, but I can imagine anarchy working, right? And that's where everybody agrees. There are no criminals. Nobody ever has an inclination to do anything wrong. A Gold's Gulch, where everybody who is there has been pre-screened a million times by Gold himself and by everybody else. Yes.
So, under the circumstance where you have a restrictive covenant, then anarchy can work. It's like, I wonder if any anarchists have thought of this before.
If you can create a community with friends, I've had friends that have gone really, really bad. But, with people you really, really trust and are going to sustain it because it's in a novel after all. So they're going to stay 100% moral throughout. Then yes, you can imagine.
Okay, yeah, this is unrealistic. It's just in a novel because they're gonna stay perfectly moral throughout. Well, gee whiz, Yaron. What about your government? Does that also have to be in a novel? Does your perfect government, which is going to be perfectly moral forever, and does that have to be in a novel? It's like, what the fuck?
Such a scenario where you don't need a police, but in any other circumstances, we need a government.
Would definitely, but he's just provided a counterexample here, where you can have a system. If you have a Galt's Gulch, where people have been vetted, and you have this restrictive covenant, and they're all moral people, then it wouldn't be a disaster. Whoopsie-daisies, he just lost the entire debate right there, right in that sentence. He just lost the entire debate. Because it says, would definitely, again, he's very sloppy with his words, like necessarily and definitely and all these things. He doesn't realize this, but he just lost the debate right there, because he provided the counterexample. He, in fact, of course, Caplan provided the counterexample initially. He said, well, what about Galt's Gulch? And then Yaron said, yeah, of course, if you have Galt's Gulch, then anarcho-capitalism wouldn't necessarily be a disaster. It's like, well, whoops, you lost. Hopefully, Caplan will be able to capitalize on the fact that Yaron just lost the debate.
We need, I see a blank piece in front of me, with no time. We need an ultimate arbitrator for disputes like this, and an objective applier of retribution. Thank you.
So there's a couple of big problems with the argument that Yaron is giving. Probably the fundamental one is there's just a pile of tautological thinking. We hear a lot of talk about how you need to have an objective, neutral arbiter. Well, where do we find that in the real world? Nowhere and never. So just repeat.
This is a funny line of attack to use against the objectivist. And I was kind of going into it a little bit earlier, where it's like, well, talk about floating abstractions. How about you? Like, when he's talking about tautological thinking, for those who are familiar with objectivism, just replace that with rationalism in your head. He's basically calling Yaron a big old fucking rationalist right now, which is got to be like the biggest insult any objectivist could ever get.
That we're going, the arbiter is going to be neutral, objective, so on. It solves nothing. The sensible approach is always comparative and saying which of these two systems is actually more prone to problems. And this is where we actually have to get empirical. We can't just sit here and use words in order to feel good about ourselves and to feel good about our prospects. Right? What is this government that is supposed to be so objective and reliable? The impartial arbiter. What government is the impartial arbiter of what happens on Earth right now? Not the United States, right? Right now, just, there again, there's also a lot of things like banishing force. Like force is never banished. It's
yeah, and this is an interesting point he just touched on there. How could you possibly have an impartial, a truly impartial, completely neutral arbiter? It's like, well, everybody's going to have some sort of bias. It's like even me, right? If you have somebody who's an aggressor and somebody who's not an aggressor, I'm going to be very partial towards the non-aggressor, right? Like, this is all a floating abstraction. And it's like, well, these biases, given you know exactly who's going to be doing all the dispute resolution, how about I bribe them? They get some of the biases in my favor. It's like, right? How are we going to keep it impartial? Answer: they got to have the right philosophy. But again, if they got the right philosophy, then you can have a Galt's Gulch, which would be anarcho-capitalism, and it would not necessarily be a disaster for humanity. So again, Yaron has lost the debate already.
It's always possible for it to go wrong. Yaron himself is saying you think your best friend in the world's fine, and then he goes crazy on you. All right, so you got that problem with countries too. There's no way of locking in through computer programming a neutral, impartial arbiter and saying, all right, we got that problem solved. Rather, you are dealing with flawed human beings all the time, and yes, things can go from being seemingly perfectly fine to being quite bad. That said, I will still say that there is such a thing as social science, and there's also more importantly a thing called betting. And if you don't believe that the peacefulness of Norway and Sweden is super likely to continue for a long time, I will take your money, because it is going to continue for a long time. I will do a bet on a century. Right? I guess it'll have to be collected by our heirs, but either way, it'll be an account. There are some facts of the social world that are so reliable that while yes, we can imagine them changing, it would be nothing short of a miracle. For the U.S. to invade Canada, can you even imagine what would have to happen for that to occur? It's a crazy idea, which shows that just because you have the upper hand in terms of physical force does not mean that you are actually going to use it, nor that the other side has no hope but to go and build up a defense. If Yaron were right, Canada would long ago have adopted a secret nuclear program to deter the U.S. because they would say, well, what is all this about? Right? The U.S. could crush us at any second. The only thing that would possibly keep them in order is nuclear weapons. But fortunately, cooler heads prevailed, and the Canadians realized, no, I think that's the one thing that might mess it up. The one thing that might mess up relations with the U.S. would be if we tried to defend ourselves. That would make them upset. That would make them worried. We will rather be causing the problem that we're trying to avoid. All right, let's see. Yes, on the point of realpolitik, this is one where Yaron makes a great point. Throughout most of human history, this story that whoever is stronger is going to just use their strength and take over is not exactly true, but there seemed to be a lot of truth to it. And then we had the two world wars, which seemed to further confirm this ugly story. And then, after 1945, miracles started happening. We have lasting peace between France and Germany. It's not quite as unlikely to go to war as Norway and Sweden, but again, I will bet you at 100 to 1 odds against any kind of serious war between France and Germany, this is the first time this has been imaginable in like 1,000 years. Now, what's going on? And this is, of course, there are so many other country pairs. Basically, every country in the EU, you can be confident.
Yeah, it's like, I'm not pausing a whole lot during Caplan stuff because he's correct about basically everything here. Unfortunately, I do really want to see him capitalize on the fact that Yaron has lost the debate already by the terms set in the resolution. Yaron has accepted a counterexample, so it's not definitely anymore. He really needs to capitalize on that. He wants to win.
They will not engage in any kind of serious war with any other country in the EU. Maybe some proxy war far away, but that's about it. Right? This is something that is historically unprecedented, but it's a big fact about the social world. How did it happen? And I say the story is that change in expectations. If any country in the EU said, let's go attack some other country in the EU, they would first be laughed at, or laughed with, and then laughed at, and then people would say, this person's a lunatic, let's get him out of power. It seems hard to believe we could have gotten into such a great equilibrium, but so we did. Right? So it is not actually historical. Now, if you say, there's some bad countries in the world, yeah, there are some. But the fact that we have gotten as far as we have since 1945 means that there is room for immense optimism about what the future of humanity is. You know Steven Pinker's Enlightenment now. I think it's a lot more likely the whole world will be like the EU in 200 years than that we will go back to the world of 1800 or 1900 in terms of how foreign policy works. It is just very difficult in the modern world to get away with using force successfully, and not just because of the agenda of the United States, but for all those reasons that I mentioned. Right? So normally diplomacy is just a better way of doing it, and is worse even for the aggressor itself. Right, now finally, remember, it's Yaron that asked for the really strong resolution. He's the one who said he's going to argue it's a complete disaster for humanity, and he ends up by saying, how do we know that Norway won't invade Sweden? All right, we don't know with absolute certainty, but that's a far cry from the resolution he's supposed to be defending. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah, we now go to the Q&A portion of the evening. There is a microphone, and you can line up to ask your questions. We're going to post a rule this evening in terms of time that you each, Yaron and Bryan, have the opportunity to ask each other 2 questions at any time. Perhaps you want to just get the audience to ask questions. But Bryan, do you want to exercise that option? Yaron, do you want to exercise that option to ask a question at this point? No. No.
Just let the audience talk for a while and do it.
I'm going to exercise moderator's prerogative to ask a particular question of Bryan. Your argument is that, and I gather it's perfectly valid, that despite all the wars we see, warfare has diminished, despite the fact that the U.S. did sponsor an invasion of Cuba, that it's invaded a lot of countries, killed millions of people, our country in particular. You are still pointing to this as optimistic because the U.S. is not about to invade Canada. So you think the trends are on your side? Is that basically your argument, despite all the bloodshed that has existed and all the invasions the U.S. has sponsored?
Yeah, things have improved tremendously. If you were to tell people in 1945 what Europe is like today, they would have laughed in your face. I think they would have said, yeah, France and Germany will have perpetual peace, more likely of World War III in 10 years. And honestly, in 1945, I think I would have agreed with them. But events have shown that's very wrong. You've got Pinker's whole story about the pacification of humanity. Of course, it's not going to happen uniformly, and there are still some bad things that are going on. But I think it is totally reasonable to think that in the next 100, 200 years, that the whole world is going to look like the West in terms of the extremely low probability of any kind of actual serious warfare between them.
Comment from you, Yaron, on that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree here really with Bryan. That is, I do think the world is amazingly peaceful, and it is an immense achievement.
Well, Bryan Caplan is using that argument to establish that, hey, it's not necessarily when you have these different gangs that they will necessarily go to gang warfare. So the fact that Yaron has agreed with the premise there, he would have to then show why it doesn't count. Like, oh well, actually it's all so peaceful because you do have these big arbiters of last dispute called the United States and China and Russia, and they've got the nukes. So it really is based on some sort of a monopoly on protection. And it's not based on, if that wasn't the case, then it would be gang warfare. Like, he needs to have some sort of argument to establish why Caplan doesn't just flow through right there. Like, he's flowing through at the moment. You need to say, hey, yes, I agree, it's much more peaceful now, but it's because of this extra reason which doesn't apply to Anarcho-Capitalism.
Of the ideas of freedom that led to kind of the creation of governments that for the most part protect individual.
Well, the reason he's giving is that, well, people agree with the ideas of freedom, which is, yeah, and what if they do that in Anarcho-Capitalism? And then it wouldn't be gang warfare, which is the exact argument I've been making.
Rights, and part of the consequence of that has been, a respect for individuals, not only in your own country, but in other countries as well. And as a consequence, yeah, I mean, I'm not going to bet on the odds of Sweden, Norway, but to say that it's impossible under certain circumstances, and again, I don't see the parallel. I'm quite willing to concede that we have multiple countries, and those countries, particularly if those countries are countries that respect individual rights, are going to exist in peace.
But even when one has overwhelming superiority force.
Even when one has overwhelming superiority force. But that does not extrapolate to the kind of conflicts that exist in the same geographic area. If you have geography matters, space matters. We live in space, and
Okay, so the difference he's going to be making is, yes, it's possible to have peace if they're in different geographical areas. So, okay, well, how specifically does it have to be a geographical area? Does it have to be me literally keeping out any competition in in this area so that I won't be competing with some other firm for the same guy. Like, or is it that they just have to literally be situated somewhere? Because those are very different things. And you know, he has to establish. He's probably going to go on to establish this. Why keeping out any competition in a particular geographic area? Why that matters? Why does that make it such that there can now be peace?
The potential for conflicts, a number of conflicts, a kind of conflicts that are potentially happening within a particular geographic area is multiplied exponentially as compared to what happens between countries. And
What? Why is it astronomically multiplied? Why are the number of potential conflicts multiplied when you have competition between firms? That isn't the case anywhere else in the market. Competition is more efficient than monopoly.
And I think it's an issue of both degree and kind. It's a completely different type of scenario.
With the smaller the countries, the more police agencies have to interact, of course. You get down to really tiny countries, they will be interacting all the time. I mean, it's not the case in the US that when you have smaller jurisdictions, you see the police fighting out more often. It basically doesn't happen.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, I mean, Europe, the European countries are in the same geographical area. Canada, North America, Mexico, in the same
If you've been
geographical
across France, it's a big place. Germany's a big place. Yeah, Luxembourg and Liechtenstein, who knows why they exist exactly. But yes, they're very small. But generally, these are big spaces. Countries, governments, I have no problem in multiple. It's good to have multiple because it's important that government reign over a particular geographic area. That's where the law applies uniformly on that area. If on the same geographic area you have multiple systems of law, you're asking for conflict. You're defining conflict into the system. And this is why it has to.
In what way are you defining? Because I mean, again, he's conflating with polycentrism. I mean, I agree that polycentrism would be a disaster, but again, that's not what the resolution states. Not what the resolution is. It doesn't say polycentrism would definitely be a disaster for humanity. It says anarcho-capitalism.
To be a disaster. Let me just one correction. The topic for this debate was genes, not mine. So it was not my formulation. My formulation was something like anarcho-capitalism is a contradiction in terms. You can't have both of them.
I must exercise moderator's prerogative to declare that every debate at the Seoul Forum, every word is signed off by each debater. I have it as a matter of record that both debaters, including Yaron, signed off on the wording.
We didn't accept the word.
And therefore, you must stick to the terms of the contract in order to avoid violent conflict. Anyway, okay, so...
you need to come to the after party and see how this is resolved.
So can I use one of my questions now, Gene?
What was that?
May I use one of my
Yes,
questions?
yeah.
So you're on the one hand, you're saying that it's fine to have multiple countries, but on the other hand, all of these dire predictions of what'll happen if one country with greater force goes and wants to do something, the other one disagrees, that exists whenever there's multiple countries. The only answer it seems like you really got is, well, they're being impartial arbiter, they're being a super government, but it doesn't sound like you want that either. So, like all these predictions of doom hold. Like if you think they are likely, they hold anytime there's multiple governments. And if you think they're unlikely, then why are you so confident about anarcho-capitalism being a complete disaster for humanity?
Well, I said that earlier. I think that the protection of individual rights resides in a particular geographic area. And while different governments might interpret the protection of individual rights differently, it affects the people in that geographic area. One of the reasons I love open immigration, and I pro-open immigration, is the ability of people to choose what kind of exact regime they want the protection of individual rights to hold under.
Yes, this is all resting on this point of if you have competition, then you necessarily, it implies that there will be way more potential conflicts. He didn't establish this point at all.
They can move from country to country.
Right, but so one country, armed robbers go from one country to another, come back, and then the first country says we don't recognize it. What do you do?
I missed the question. Sorry, I was thinking about my answer.
So like usual case, some French bank robbers go into Germany, rob it, go back to France, and then say, oh, we did not raid. Our government will protect us. Right, and maybe
That happens all the time, right? We do have bank robbers who go to countries that don't have
actually what normally happens is France says, oh, we will protect. We hand them over to the Germans, and they get tried, and that's the way they do business.
Yes, and they've got deals. But again, you're ignoring the idea that there is a one rule under one system. What if Germany decided that it was going to protect bank robbers, and it had a system that it was going to protect bank robbers, and any bank robbers who left France came to Germany?
Yeah, what if Yaron? What if that happened?
Were going to be protected. What if in the same geographic area you had an insurance agency that basically said, we're insuring bank robbers, we'll take your money, we'll take a cut.
It's like, hold on, Yaron. You glossed that over. Slow it down, okay. You glossed over that your reductio applies just as heavily to the state case. Whoops. Yes, thank you for the $3, Bonhop. Can you slow it down, please? Yeah, I'll do like a 1.6 or something.
Of everything you do, and we are going to protect you, and we'll apply force in order to protect you from the consequences. How do you resolve that? Is ultimately one defense agency is going to have to impose itself on the other?
Look, this is the same story France and Germany. Like if France really didn't like Germany protecting some French bank robbers, you know what happened? They would make a strongly worded letter, and then at first nothing would happen. And then conditions would gradually deteriorate. Normally, of course, the other side would say, we really shouldn't be making such a big deal about these stupid bank robbers. Let's hand them back over. And that's how it actually happens. That's how the U.S. and Canada deal with each other. Yes, it is negotiation, but no, this is not tautology. I don't just say that these are rational countries and therefore will handle it in a rational way. I say this is what really happens with the real places, the real world. And by the way, one other thing
places that are already rational because it doesn't happen in other places, right?
These are a bunch of crummy social democracies that you and I both despise, Yaron. How can you say such good things about these countries? They're terrible. France and Germany, and the United States and Canada, these are crummy social democracies.
Yes,
they're a disgrace.
Yeah. I think relative to history, we still live with the best governments in human history. And
relative to their moral obligations, we both know they are criminals.
Terrible. I think we could. These guys could go at it for another couple of hours because they're both.
Read too much, Gene.
They're both. I'm sorry. They're both very lively minds. But I want to give the audience a chance to ask a question. Please frame it like a question and don't have to identify yourself. If you're addressing the question to a particular individual, say so. Go ahead. Take it away, sir.
Professor Caplan, you want to completely shrink government down to nothing, which is, in my view, a very hard sell. But to make your job easier, Oh, okay, good. You want to completely shrink government down to nothing, which is a very hard sell, in my view. To make your job easier, could you promote the shrinking of government down to the limited level Dr. Brook is advocating, which you would need to do anyway? And then, without mentioning anarchy at all, once that limited government is achieved, let it breathe for 5 years, and then at the end of that, if you're still dissatisfied, then you can push for anarchy.
Well, you wanna eliminate murder completely. How about that's a very hard sell. How about you allow just a little bit of murder? You know, it's the old compromise meme. Like you know, you want a little bit. How about we just have a little bit of murder, and then if you're still not satisfied, then we'll go all the way. How about that? It's like, no. How about get rid of it all? I can't find this. Yes, here we go. This is the question that he's asking right now. He is this guy. Like, well, let's just compromise between you two. But like, the thing is, a compromise between them is actually your own system, because that's a government. So Caplan should absolutely reject this.
Totally reasonable. Totally reasonable. Look, I'd be happy if we could shrink government 1%. That would be amazing. You know, people say, what's the point of writing your book saying you should get rid of all government funding for education? Say, to give a little bit of steel to someone that doesn't want to increase education funding. Right? So yeah, like I'll take what I can get, honestly. But conceptually, the key point is that if you did get down to minarchy, the last step to anarcho-capitalism would be almost nothing, especially when you remember the role of binding arbitration. Important thing about binding arbitration is that if we had it now, that would almost be the end of the regulatory state already. Because guess what? I could run a business and my brother could be the arbitrator. And then no longer will any sexual harassment laws get enforced. No longer will any wage regulations be enforced. No longer any safety regulations be enforced. If you have binding arbitration, you get around almost any existing law.
Who's binding?
Quick comment from you, Yaron. Comment, go ahead.
Yeah, who's binding it? That is who
No, the wizard. That's who's binding it. You go to Gandalf. That's who binds it.
actually implements the decision of the court if the parties decide not, at the end of it, to not agree with the binding arbitration with the decision. There has to be somebody who steps in and uses force here. And the question is, I mean, today it exists. Today arbitration exists because there is a final authority. There is a final determinant of the use of force and the application of it. But in anarchy, it's
well, what if they go bad? Whoops. Yeah, it's terrible now. if that one final arbiter, if they decide to do something criminal, then you've got no recourse.
it's just. I don't want to go to jail.
So actually, not really. I mean, here's the thing: with binding arbitration, there's a really easy way to make enforceable without government, which is everyone posts a big bond, and that's where the damages come out of. That means you don't even need to go to the government in order to get it enforced. If you post $1 million bond and then the arbitrator says you owe $500,000, you say I object. It's like, well, too bad. We've already transferred $500,000 out of the account because you signed it over to us.
Sure, these are easy in these.
Yes.
In only if it's only monetary, it's easy. If it's smaller than $1 million,
Yes.
it's easy.
Yeah, I agree.
Sure. And I have no doubt that arbitration would exist under any system. Much of this can be done in arbitration.
I mean, my point is that once we get to minarchy, a minarchic government is morally obliged to accept binding arbitration contracts, and once they do that, there's almost nothing for them left to do. And that point is like, so all you do is deal with enforcing binding arbitration when one side refuses to go along. That's your job. That is not just like 1% of what it currently does. We're talking about 0.0001%. It's down to next to nothing.
It's not clear that most people would want binding arbitration. There would be an option of them to get arbitration done by the state. There's no reason to believe binding arbitration would be better than
because government's incompetent. It sucks.
Government incompetent. It sucks. Is the government we have today. That's not how government has to be. And there's absolutely no reason why government couldn't provide that arbitration. It could.
I mean, he's saying that isn't the way the government has to be, but what is the cause of government being better than that? Answer: the philosophy of the day, right? Same thing with anarcho-capitalism.
Could be one option.
Next
And look,
question,
I
next
have
question.
no objection to shrinking government as much as we can, as long as it is the ultimate authority, in terms of use of force in a particular geographic area.
Next question.
Hi, my question.
Go ahead.
No.
Can you hear it?
Go ahead.
My question is for Bryan. It's the first conceptualization of anarcho-capitalism, where you have these small corporations that occupy a certain territory. It sounds to me a lot like monarchy in a very small form. What's the difference between this capitalist who owns this area and then allows people to rent for part of it, versus a king who has an area and has their peasants on the land?
Well, the difference is it's voluntary, right? It arose from the market, whereas a king doesn't.
Yeah, I mean, the big difference is just who does it and who's going to actually be good at doing this. So in the real world, we see that when there's competition between monarchies and corporations, corporations win. Monarchies just aren't very good at doing anything in the modern world other than maybe promoting tourism or something like that. So, yeah, I mean, in principle, yes, you could have someone says, I'm the king of Bartaria and you can go and move here and be under my rule. I don't think that's likely to be a successful business model because it doesn't work in almost any other industry that I know of, again, other than maybe promoting tourism a little bit.
Comment.
So if a corporation sets up its territory and says, "Come here and burn surf," and there are people who go there, you're fine with that. So
I mean,
gone individual
well,
rights.
sure.
Who cares about individual rights? Who cares about individual freedom and liberty?
Well, of course.
As long as they did it, quote, voluntarily. They might be poor people who don't have any other options. They come from the south and they go. As long as that's fine. They violate their rights freely, as long as what?
You realize this is the standard complaint of every leftist against almost every job that low-skilled people get, right?
there's a difference. There's
No,
a
I mean,
big
like the
difference.
difference is-
There's a big difference. I think we understand between becoming a slave and becoming an employee. There's a big difference in how you're treated. There's a big difference in how your rights are respected.
Yeah, so don't agree to be a slave. Like, this is, what are you doing?
And the reality is that even if people go there and become slaves, who's going to protect them? Why should anybody protect them, right? They went there voluntarily. The corporation could change the law, by the way, and they can change it and turn them into slaves, and who cares, right? So the principle of individual rights doesn't exist under anarchy. It doesn't exist. Property rights are not being protected. They're being violated at the whim of the monarch, the king. I mean, we might have monarchs under anarcho-capitalism, under the corporation. So the whole principle on which freedom is founded, the whole principle on which individual liberty is founded, is trashed in the name of, well, let's see, maybe the corporation can make a living, maybe it won't. Maybe slavery is not economically viable.
Final comment from you, Bryan, about that.
Try. We can
Yeah.
change.
This is more tautological thinking of you're going comparing actual corporations to a theoretically ideal government. If we're talking about the real, we can say, how do you know the government won't screw people over? It's like, yeah, I don't. Now, in the case of the business model you're talking about, it's very similar to the company town, which has a very bad reputation. But as noted economic historian Price Fishbeck has shown, company towns actually were fine.
Next question.
So both of you can respond to this, but if I'm understanding Brian's argument correctly, you're saying that even though most people think anarcho-capitalism wouldn't happen here today, couldn't happen, might be terrible if we try to force it right now, that it's conceivable because in 1200 the Vikings couldn't conceive of democracy, but here we have it today. So my point, though, to question is that in 1200.
But I don't think that's actually the argument Caplan was making. He was making the argument like, well, you can't say it is necessarily impossible. Like, he's giving all sorts of economic reasons for why it would be valuable, and then he's also just saying, well, like, hey, back in 1200, they thought that democracy would be impossible, and they're right because the philosophy of the day wasn't there. He's making the philosophy of the day argument.
Even though the Vikings might not have known about it, there were historical examples of democracies and republics that had flourished and gotten along peacefully with their neighbors, right? So they had existed actually before 1200, well before 1200. But I don't know of a single example of an anarcho-capitalist society ever. Right?
Well, Iceland.
Right, so doesn't the fact that anarcho-capitalism has failed to reify anywhere in the world, in fact, count massively against the probability?
And this applies equally to your own. Where is this perfect government? When has it ever been?
That it wouldn't be a disaster for humanity.
The question's clear. Go, take it away.
All right, great question. All right, so David Friedman, if he were here, would tell you all about Iceland. I think he's probably right about Iceland as being darn close to anarcho-capitalism. I take his word for it, but I don't speak Icelandic, so I'm not going to say I've gone through the archives myself. I would actually just point to not just minarchy, but cases where of private arbitration, private security, where we see that we actually, not only can we get away from government law, but there's immense demand to get away from government law because government law is bad, and people would rather deal with something that is more efficiently produced by the business community. Now, by the way, so my argument is not just that people in 1200 didn't realize the world could be really different, therefore my idea about how the world could be really different is likely too. That would be a bad argument. So I'm actually referring specifically to literature on what are the incentives under anarcho-capitalism. I didn't have time to go over them in detail, but it is out there. I mean, and just to say, like, is it true? Is it all expectations? No. Sometimes expectations aren't enough. Like, if everybody expects that everyone will clean up the communal kitchen, do you know what happens? The kitchen is filthy. Because everyone says somebody else will do it, so I don't need to, and then the kitchen's filthy. But on the other hand, if everybody expects that war's not going to happen, guess what? Then if you push war, you do seem like a crazy person. So again, it is not just this pretty lame argument that things have changed a lot, therefore things could change a lot in my direction. That would be just true, but pretty trivial. But rather what I say is actually we can look at the actual analysis of the incentives. Furthermore, I think there are historical examples that are very close. But yeah, it's not going to be perfect. But then again, guess what? Those Greek democracies aren't such great examples of democracy either. And I think you're wrong about the peace, right? Usual stories of Athens was the big aggressor in most of the Greek wars of the time.
Comment from you, Yaron?
Yeah, two things. One is, if you're interested in Iceland, I would recommend reading the Icelandic sagas, as I did on a visit to Iceland. Wow, the brutality, the violence, pretty amazing.
Well, duh. Like, well, yeah, I'm gonna write a saga. I'm gonna write a saga about, like, just boring everyday life. Yeah, that'll sure survive the years. I'll be reading it for decades. That one. What are you talking about? Obviously, like, go to any country at all, any people, they're gonna write about exciting things. They're gonna write about, like, cave paintings. Cave paintings. They aren't just kind of sitting around chilling. They're hunting. It's exciting. It's violence. People like this type of stuff.
How anarchy deteriorated very quickly.
It's like, David Friedman's argument is like, well, this was actually, relatively speaking, way, way, way less murder. Like, the murder rate was basically nothing for the period of relative anarchy, right? And the only non-anarchic part of the system was the Lagretta, this parliament they had, where all of the Godar, the chieftains, had to go to this parliament and they would vote, and there wasn't free entry into the chieftaincy profession. This is an argument that Roderick Long makes. There wasn't free entry into chieftaincy, so eventually Christianity came along, and they decided that they would have a tithe. Right, you'd have to pay taxes, because a few families basically took control of this parliament, and they wouldn't let anybody else be a chieftain. So if there was free entry into the chieftaincy profession, the peace would have lasted forever. Right? There's absolutely no indication that it would ever stop. Like, so this is ludicrous. Like, yeah, a couple anecdotes of violent things happening in, largely fictionalized accounts. Like, whoa, I guess Anarcho-Capitalism can't work.
Quickly, and people killing each other's siblings and destroying each other's property. That's what happens in anarchy when you don't have any kind of any.
Well, I'll tell you what happens under anarchy is the god Zeus comes down and he rapes women. It's like, what are you fucking talking about here, Yaron?
Kind of rule of law. But
David Friedman says it was 200 years with a lower per capita murder rate than continental Europe.
Yeah, there you go. Facts don't care about your anecdotes.
Yeah, super skeptical. And again,
what are you skeptical about? Demonstrate where he's gone wrong.
And read the stories Icelandics write about their own period of anarchy and the stories they tell about how it was.
The most exciting stories will survive, not the super boring ones. Like, when's the last time you went to a movie without any violence, Yaron? So, therefore, 500 years from now, they're going to be like, whoa, it must have been so violent back then. Like, this Superman guy, he's fighting kaiju every day. Whoa, so violent. It's like, fucking duh. That's the most exciting type of story. It's not going to be really boring shit. When was the last time you went to see a movie where it was really boring and it was just everyday life? It was slice of life, right? Ayn Rand hated slice of life type of art. She thought it was a complete negation of what art's supposed to be about. So, what are we supposed to expect the Icelandic people to be using slice of life sagas? No. Why? Why would you want that?
I think it will be quite eye-opening in terms of the David Friedman story. Had another point, but it's gone, so go ahead.
Next question.
Just as a demographic prediction from each debater, do you think a large portion of objectivists nowadays, perhaps a growing portion, are anarcho-capitalists, since
Well, we got this question earlier.
completely consistent property rights adherence presumably means you can't steal from somebody and call it taxes, you can't regulate somebody, and you can't assault somebody and call it regulation. Are they turning into anarcho-capitalists, whether Ayn Rand would have liked it or not?
Indeed they are, again. I told you my friend went to Ocon. He told me majority of the young objectivists there were aware of me. So, if any of you guys are watching, keep going. Keep going ANCAP. Keep going in that direction.
Yaron, why don't you take that question first?
I would say by definition, no. So I don't think you could be an objectivist and anarcho-capitalist. And indeed,
Well, too bad. You're wrong.
I meant to say this here in my talk, but I think anarcho-capitalism is a contradiction in terms. I don't think you got capitalism and anarchy at the same point in time.
No, that's nonsense. Anarchism actually implies capitalism. Capitalism implies anarchism. So you've got capitalism, okay, well that's a total free market, which means you can't have anybody ruling anybody else, which means, logically, to be consistent, you'd have to be an anarchist as well, and vice versa.
Time, you're either an anarchist or a capitalist. Capitalism requires government, as I tried to articulate. So no, I don't think they are. But the anarcho-capitalist, as they call themselves, community is definitely growing, and a lot of them were influenced by Ayn Rand. I think Bryan would be one of them, right? So people who've been influenced by Ayn Rand and are today anarcho-capitalists, there's a lot of them. People who are objectivists and anarcho-capitalists, there are none of.
You want to comment, Bryan? Or you want to wave? You want to comment? No, okay.
Totally defer to Yaron, except on the definition.
Okay. Next question.
Thank you both for the debate. I have a question for Caplan. Could you please share your thoughts on how global trade would function between an
Monhop for $8. Thank you very much. Imagine this debate in 500 years, and Yaron is arguing that Marvel movies prove that New York was blown up every 5 years. Yeah, exactly.
anarcho-capitalist country and a non-anarcho-capitalist country? In general, I'm concerned about the practical anarcho-capitalist country and could you please share your thoughts on how global trade would function between an anarcho-capitalist country and a non-anarcho-capitalist country? In general,
Well, just people trade, and presumably, obviously she's going to finish her question, presumably the non-anarcho-capitalist area, the country, they'd probably be taxing their people on all this trade, which would be bad. But hopefully there'd be at least a somewhat amount of free trade.
in general, I'm concerned about the practical integration of an anarcho-capitalist country on a global scale.
I mean, honestly, I would say that you're likely to get a great pacification of the earth and a move in an anarcho direction before you're going to get anarcho-capitalism anywhere. Once that is the norm around the world, that countries are first of all Pacific, and second of all that most of them are at least in general sympathy with these ideas, then one area going further, I think, will get the same kind of, what's the right word? The same kind of sympathy and fellow travelerhood that the Soviet Union got from all the socialist sympathizing countries in the world. It's like, well, they may be going a little too far, maybe a little crazy, but they're noble idealists. So, like the fear that they would get attacked by others or taken over, like in the world where it's likely to happen is, I think, really low. I mean, worth pointing out, the Soviet Union did not actually suffer any serious invasion until the Nazis. There were some very feeble efforts to unseat them, but that was it. And a lot of it was these fifth columnists around the world saying that it's a noble experiment, give it a chance.
Comment, Yaron?
Yeah, that's a good point from Caplan. Again, it ties into Peikoff's philosophical theory of history. If you have the philosophy of the day is correct, then you wouldn't expect people to be attacking that, even if the people aren't fully aligned. You know, what is a country which is claimed to be like super capitalist? Would they go like, oh, those traders over there, we're going to kill them all? How would they get the support of their people for that?
No. Next question.
Question for Caplan, which is, how do we guarantee that the conditions of freedom from coercion exist without a final arbiter, especially when, there's some decisions just should not be on the table. For example, you should not be allowed to be an organization that allows child molestation, and even if a large number of people think that's okay, and there.
I mean, again, this applies to the state as well. How do you guarantee freedom from coercion? Well, you can't guarantee freedom from coercion in any system. Right? There is no magic wand which you can wave and guarantee that nobody will ever suffer any aggressions ever. It doesn't exist. Like, that isn't an Anarcho-Capitalism versus minarchism issue. That's just a fact, right? People have the potential to aggress against you. There is that risk. That risk does exist. So no, there is no guarantees in life. Right? You can't guarantee that. It's like, well, how do you guarantee that nobody will ever go hungry? You can't guarantee that. The Soviets, they tried to guarantee it by starving everybody. Now that's what happens when you try to guarantee things. And no, there are no guarantees. You can't guarantee bad thing will never happen.
There are always going to be a large swath of people that are vulnerable and not capable of making decisions, and also I guess answer that one first.
Right. So this is the real world, so there's no guarantees. Sorry.
Boom. Me and Caplan, we're like, I'm liking his style here.
Of course, this applies for both governments and anarchy. How do we guarantee there won't be any government that goes and starves millions of their own people? Oh, whoops, there were a bunch of governments that did that. There's just no guarantees. Right, so the only thing that's sensible is to think about comparative risk. Which system is likely to have a lower risk? This is one where, like I said, if we are in a society where most people think that anarcho-capitalism will...
Exactly, and he's taking it into, again, what do you expect would come out from these different situations. This is exactly the correct line of attack.
Collapse, then guess what? It's going to collapse. Right? On the other hand, if we're in a world where most people expect to be stable, then it will be stable. How do we guarantee there won't be any area that allows...
Hold on here. I found a particularly schizophrenic comment from Town Fool, evolutionary capitalism, utilitarianism. Co-ownership proves taxation isn't theft, and that's why Zulu is scared of it. Completely bonkers. Okay.
Allows anything bad? We can't. So right now, I was just hearing the story that in the 70s, Denmark legalized child pornography. And you know what the response to the rest of the world was? Nothing. All right. So that's the real world. There's just no guarantees. Sorry.
So I think there should be guarantees, and I think that's what we should be advocating.
What do you mean should be guarantees? It's not a should be. There just isn't. I think there should be. It should be a law of physics that nobody's ever hungry. But it's not subject to normativity. What are you talking about here? There just are no guarantees. Caplan's making just a claim, a metaphysical claim here, and you're bringing it way up into ethics. Well, I think that people should always be happy. Well, that's not the case.
By who? World governments? Who guarantees anything?
In a particular geographic area, there should be guarantees, or at least that's what we
should be guaranteed. It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense. There just aren't guarantees.
should be striving for. That is to set up an ideal that internally says there are going to be no guarantees. Yeah, if some people want to molest children.
That's not an ideal. That's the ideal. Is that the crime doesn't happen. That's the anarcho-capitalist case. We actually have a way better argument for why these things are crimes and why they shouldn't happen. By the way, yeah, that is the ideal, that it doesn't happen. But there is no guarantee that you get the ideal. That's the point. It is the ideal, but there's no guarantee that you achieve the ideal. This is what Caplan's saying. This might be like an impressive little rhetorical flourish for the objectivist audience, well, I think there should be guarantees. It's like a politician. Well, I think 9/11 was bad, and I think the terrorists should stop. Okay, great.
Children, and they get a security agency to protect them, so be it. Then we're negating this fundamental principle of individual rights. This is why it's a complete disaster. This is why it's bad for humanity. That is, in a particular geographic area, we should be striving towards a system that does guarantee that children are not molested. Now,
no, you can't strive towards a system that guarantees it. He's flipping things around.
Some children be molested? Yes. Will they be prosecuted? Yes. Right? So,
you can strive towards a system where you can strive towards the world where there aren't any crimes or anything like that. You can strive towards that, sure. But you can't strive towards a world where it's metaphysically impossible for there to be crime. Doesn't exist. That's not possible. It's a naive floating abstraction. Whoops.
So that is the kind of system we want to achieve. We want to strive towards. To set up a system which we know, if enough people pay enough money, they will be protected. That is a negation of the whole idea of human flourishing and individual success and liberty.
Yeah, what do you think you went to Costco and you said, is this product guaranteed? And they said, well, we're striving to guarantee it. That's the same as not guaranteeing. Right? So yes, I'm all in favor of making the world better and doing a good job, but to me, that's just empty promises, and you've got to do better than that if you promise to guarantee what you can't.
But capitalism
this really is just like in the movie Fargo, when there is the guy who's responsible for having his wife kidnapped, sorry to give the movie away, and then his father-in-law says, what guarantee do I have of this money? And he says, well, the guarantee is I guarantee you'll get it back. It's not a guarantee. So look, this is just the real world. I'm not going and expressing a blasé or indifferent attitude to human suffering. I am saying don't make promises that you can't actually back up because you can't.
But that's the whole principle of individual rights. The whole principle of individual rights, the whole idea of a government that protects individual rights is to provide that guarantee.
No. The principle of individual rights isn't, we're going to make it a law of logic that aggression is now impossible. Or else there would be no use of this concept of rights. If it was truly guaranteed that nobody ever violates your rights, the concept of rights just wouldn't come up. Right? The concept of rights only comes up because people can violate. There is a potential that somebody violates your rights, that your rights aren't guaranteed.
Whether it's implemented and applied 100%, but that is the kind of system that you want to build, the kind of system that is defined in a sense of, we are going to protect people's liberty. We are going to protect people's individual rights. And if you set it up without that protection, then you're setting it up for a failure if the standard is individual flourishing.
Okay, yeah. Next question.
I have a quick follow-up.
Excuse me, I'm sorry. I wish we could do that, but we want to give more people the opportunity to ask questions. Go ahead, sir.
This is for both debaters. One method that has been suggested for encouraging competition among provision of security is to allow districts to secede from their historic states and either go independent or join the adjacent nation or state government. Such as should the United States be allowed to secede from the British Empire? Should Ukraine be allowed to secede from the Soviet Union? Should Crimea be allowed to secede from Ukraine?
Yeah, I think this question does have some bad premises. Like, it's not about allowed or not allowed. No government's allowed to be a government in the first place. But it would be better if you had secession, peaceful secession, like if the South could have peacefully seceded from the Union, and if Texas can peacefully secede from the U.S., that would be a lot better than obviously it's the 10,000 Liechtensteins point. The more Liechtensteins you have, it'll tend to be way less aggressing on your rights. Now, obviously, if I wanted to secede from the Union so that I could kill all the Jews, I collected all the Jews, and I want to secede to kill them all. Well, there's a bit of a package there. The killing would be bad. The secession is fine. Mises goes over this. Ideally, you'd have secession right down to the individual.
Should Maine be allowed to secede from the United States and go join Canada?
Yeah, this is Orbiter City, this chat.
Either of you go along with that, or do you think that is...
Well, yeah, you've led off most of the time, right? So the right of secession should
I will say, just to address Existence University, I will be responding to zero of the arguments you make. None of them, until you agree to debate me. That's your choice.
California secede from the U.S.?
I said the only reason to secede is if you're moving towards a state of greater freedom. If you're moving towards a state of greater protection of individual rights, then I think you have a right to secede. But that right to secede is irrelevant because nobody's going to let California secede. That is, it's not going to be negotiated. They're not going to sit down and agree to it, just like it didn't happen.
Nobody's going to let California secede. Well, gee whiz, my country, Scotland, would have been let to secede, right? There was a vote on it. The vote didn't go that way, right? Is Yaron saying that, like, as a logical necessity, if the referendum had gone the way of Scotland being independent, that the UK would have immediately invaded Scotland to prevent it? Like, why would the Prime Minister even sign off on there being a referendum in the first place?
With the United States leaving Great Britain, a war has to be fought. A war would be fought. So secession, no state in the U.S. is going to secede without a civil war. But
Canada almost allowed Quebec to secede. They would have if the vote had gone the other way. So there's no war.
Special.
UK gave Scotland
so
a
the
vote.
only reason.
Like, so Yaron, he keeps doing all these things like, well, necessarily nobody will ever let California secede. Nobody will ever have peaceful secession. And it's like, well, what about Canada and Quebec? Well, it's like, well, that's a special case. It's like, well, hold on. But that's a counterexample. Again, Yaron does not understand that counterexamples like these completely destroy his entire case.
Reason to secede, the only legitimate reason to secede is to become more free, to become more socialist. Then you're violating the rights of your own citizens by making them less free through secession.
I mean, I mostly agree with you around there. You're on there, actually. I do not support secession in general. You got to show me it's going to give you some incredible benefits, or else it's just a waste of time.
Next question.
Thank you. My question is mainly directed at Dr. Caplan, although I would enjoy hearing Dr. Brooks' thoughts on my question, which is, Dr. Caplan, I operate from the premise that capitalism is a political system and that politics is a derivative of ethics or morality. And if you are an advocate of capitalism, I wonder if you could explain from where your moral basis or your moral foundation that you build on to be an advocate of that political system called capitalism. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. This is my chance to plug Mike Huemer's incredible book, The Problem with Political Authority, which answers the question.
Yeah. Okay.
What he says...
Yeah. As I figured, he's going to be one of these, vague intuitionist, consequentialist type people.
Is that we have presumptive individual rights of the libertarian kind. If it would lead to total disaster, then it's okay to violate those rights. Normally that doesn't happen. And that's why it's important to understand social science to see, is it really true that it would be disastrous to go and follow these policies? And if it's not, then I go back to the default of individual rights.
Comment from you, Yaron, and unfortunately, that's going to have to be the last question. This is good. Okay, last question from you then, sir. Go ahead.
Dr. Brook, you are an advocate of minarchism, but you acknowledge that states exist in a world of different nations.
Bro, they gotta get this guy a taller fucking mic. Let him extend this or something. Guy's like leaned way over.
And Dr. Caplan, you described the world as an anarcho-capitalist world, but I believe at some point you said that ideally we would have a world of a lot of minarchist states, perhaps like a Hoppe and 1,000 Liechtensteins. So are, in fact, both of you saying the same thing? And this actually isn't even a debate.
Oh, well, okay. I'm afraid that question is going to have to stand.
No.
But okay, this non-debate will have to...
All right, well, I guess we're done now. Yeah, thank you very much for everybody coming. Thank you very much for the donations. I thought it was pretty good. Yeah, I mean, if anybody has any suggestions of any more debates they want me to go over, then absolutely send them in, and I'll give it serious weight. Yeah, thank you very much for coming. I'll thank you even to the arbiters, to the losers,